and welcome to everyone. It's really wonderful to see you all by picture or by little name tag that says who you are. This is a strange way for us to meet in this pandemic, and we are still so powering through trying to get to a better place. But in the meantime, it's not so bad for us to be able to meet on Zoom like this, where you can just click on your camera and you can be part of this wonderful community that is fascinated by science and that understands the importance of science. I am deeply honored to be Dean of the College of Science. I've been here for 6 months now, and I am so pleased to be part of Northeastern and to be part of this extraordinarily interesting, important College of Science. More than ever, science is so incredibly important. If it wasn't for science, as you know, there would be no coronavirus vaccine that we are all eagerly awaiting. If it wasn't for science, we would not understand the workings of the human mind, which is why you are all here to get some insight from one of the world's great intellects on the workings of the human mind. This series that we have showcases the wonderful scientists at all levels who are part of the research effort of the College of Science. The research that we do extends from the tiniest entities to the largest parts of the universe. The Department of Psychology focuses on the mind and the brain in its normal workings, the brain in its disorders, and our Department of Psychology makes extraordinary contributions to understanding normal brain or regular, whatever we call normal. That's such a term I don't like to use. The workings of the brain amongst everyone and the workings of the brain when clearly things are not going as well as they could. You've heard in this series from a more junior member of the psychology department, Professor Rebecca Shansky, who told you about her scholarship, and that was just fascinating. And today I am thrilled to be able to pre-introduce one of our most eminent researchers in the psychology department and in the College of Science, Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett. Professor Feldman Barrett, as our department chair will introduce more extensively in a moment, is a brilliant investigator. She has been lauded across the world on Times Square bulletin boards. She really is a fantastic investigator. She is also a wonderful human being, and I think you'll see both of those aspects today. We are so proud to have Professor Feldman Barrett as part of our psychology department. I am so incredibly supportive of the psychology department and the work that is being done there. I am delighted to introduce you to this aspect of the College of Science, and I am delighted to now introduce Professor Peter Becks, who is our outstanding chair of the Department of Psychology, who will pick it up and will further introduce Professor Feldman Barrett. Pete?
Thank you, Hazel, and thank you everybody for coming today. It's a great privilege to be able to introduce my colleague, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. Lisa Feldman Barrett is a University Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Director of the Interdisciplinary Affective Science Laboratory at Northeastern University. She also holds research appointments in the Department of Psychiatry and the Department of Radiology at Mass General Hospital in Harvard Medical School. Dr. Barrett is among the top 1% most cited scientists for her revolutionary research in psychology and neuroscience. Her research focuses on how the human brain, in continual conversation with the human body and the world, regulates the body and creates mental events such as episodes of emotion. Her work is explicitly multidisciplinary and incorporates insights from anthropology, philosophy, linguistics, and the history of psychology. Dr. Barrett grew up in impoverished circumstances and was the first person in her extended family to attend university. She originally trained as a clinical psychologist and spent much of the first decade of her career receiving additional training in psychophysiology, neuroanatomy, and human neuroscience, all funded by the NIH. Dr. Barrett is known as an innovator in psychology. She was an early adopter and innovator of experience sampling methods. In 2007, she received an NIH Director's Pioneer Award for transformative research on the neurobiological basis of emotion. This has led to a predictive processing account of brain function and architecture and psychological function, which places brain metabolics, affect, and emotion at the core of the human mind, and correspondingly offering a trans-disorder approach to understanding mental and physical illness. Dr. Barrett has been called the most important effective neuroscientist of our time and the deepest thinker on the nature of emotion since Darwin. She's been honored with election to numerous scientific societies, including the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the Royal Society of Canada. Dr. Barrett is a prolific scientist, having published over 250 peer-reviewed articles in papers in journals such as Science and Nature Neuroscience, and she has edited 5 scientific volumes. Her colleagues have called her research groundbreaking, inspirational, and transformative. Her research has been continuously funded by a range of institutes in the US National Institute of Health and the National Science Foundation for over 20 years. She's received numerous awards for her research, such as a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2019 and Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award in Psychology from the American Psychological Association. She's also received awards for her service to psychological science, including the 2013 Award for Distinguished Service to Psychological Science from the American Psychological Association and the 2018 Lifetime Mentor Award from the Association for Psychological Science. More than 60 of her current and former students, as well as younger colleagues, collaborated in her nomination letter, in which they described Dr. Barrett as an inspirational, generous, and dedicated mentor and role model who is a brilliant intellectual and a fearless leader whose passion is infectious and enticing. In 2019 to 2020, she served as president of the Association for Psychological Science. Dr. Barrett also educates the public about emotion and neuroscience with articles in the New York Times, Popular Science, Nautilus, Cosmopolitan, and Time magazine, and there's a full list available on her website. And her TED Talk in 2018 has been viewed over 6 million times and was voted one of the most popular talks in 2018. Her research has been discussed in over 200 pieces published on major media outlets, including NPR, NBC, Invisibilia, and the Wall Street Journal, Wired magazine, and in Time magazine. Dr. Barrett also works with museums such as the Boston Museum of Science to help them utilize the most current scientific insights on emotion, and she educates lawyers, judges, and other legal actors about emotion, neuroscience, and the law as the Chief Scientific Officer of the Center of Law, Brain and Behavior at Massachusetts General Hospital. In 2007, Dr. Barrett testified before US Congress in support of basic behavioral research. Her first popular science book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, in 2017 was described as brilliant and original, mind-blowing, and a delight to read. Her second book, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, was described with similar accolades. She's currently working on a scholarly volume to be published in MIT Press, entitled Emotions in Human and Non-Human Animals, an Evolutionary and Developmental Neuroscience Approach. And having read and enjoyed her previous books, I'm really looking forward to reading her new work. And I'm also really looking forward to hearing her talk today. So it's a pleasure to introduce you, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Let me just begin by thanking Hazel and Pete for the lovely introduction. And I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Okay. So greetings from Newton, just outside of Boston. I'm not sure how things are where the weather is where you are today. For us, it's pretty sunny here and a little chilly. It's really my pleasure to be able to talk to you today about the work that we've done in our lab. And I just want to say that for the most part, I'm going to be keeping things at a pretty high level of description. I'm not going to show you too much data. I'm merely going to describe the findings from our experiments with visuals and metaphors and so on. And then occasionally I will show you a little bit of data. I have to show you at least one brain image. Otherwise, you know, I'd be kicked out of the Society for Neuroscience. So I'll probably talk, I've aimed to talk around a half an hour and then we can take questions at the end. So to understand how you are the architect of your experience, we have to start with the 3-pound blob of meat between your ears. you ended up with one of the most fascinating objects that evolution has ever created. But why do you have a brain? Is it to feel, to think, to see? Not really. Your brain's most important job is controlling the systems of your body. It's kind of like running a budget for your body. Your brain's not budgeting money, but more like internal resources, water, salt, glucose hormones, and so on to keep you alive and well. And this continuing budgeting process is largely invisible to you, and it's always running. Like right now, for example, it might seem like you're sitting calmly listening to me talk, but actually you have a whole drama that's unfolding inside your own body that you are largely unaware of because you're not wired to perceive it. Instead, evolution has given you a simple barometer that hints at when your body budget is generally in balance and when it's in the red. And we experience this barometer as simple feelings. Here's a map of these simple feelings, like feeling pleasant, feeling unpleasant, feeling still, feeling alert. People also call these feelings mood. A scientist like me might call them affect. Feelings are a quick summary of what's going on in your body without much detail. And your brain has to link these simple feelings to what's going on around you in the world in order to know what to do about them. And sometimes, but not always, this linking process produces an emotion. How can a feeling not be an emotion? Well, actually, half the world defines emotion not as feelings, but as actions. The feelings that I'm talking about, these very simple feelings that come from your brain's budgeting and controlling your body, are really a property of consciousness. Your brain is always body budgeting. The technical term for that is allostasis. And you are always feeling its consequences, whether you focus on those feelings or not. Emotion, on the other hand, is a more complex construction. So feelings are built into your brain from birth. Emotions, however, are not built into your brain from birth. They are built by your brain as needed. Let me give you an intuition of how this actually works. I want you to take a look at this image. If you've never seen this image before, then right now, billions of neurons in your brain are trying to make sense of this visual information on the screen. Your brain is searching through a lifetime of experiences from the past, issuing thousands of guesses at once, weighing probabilities, trying to answer the question, what is this most like? Not what is this, but what is this most like from my past? And it's all happening outside of your awareness and in the blink of an eye. Now, if you see only black and white blobs, then your brain hasn't found a good match yet, and you are in a state that philosophers call experiential blindness. And so now I'm going to cure you of your blindness. I'm going to do that again. Many of you now see a bee. Why? Because now when your brain searches through past experience, you have new knowledge there from the color photograph that you saw just moments ago. And that knowledge changes how you experience these blobs right now. So your brain is actually constructing the image of a bee, even though there's actually no bee present on the screen. What you are experiencing is a combination of what is on the screen and what is in your head. Now, when we experience things that are mostly in our head, like the lines that make the shape of the bee here, we have a name for this in science. We call it a hallucination. And this kind of a hallucination, though, is business as usual for your brain. In fact, philosophers, when they describe what the brain is doing, talk about the brain as constructing controlled hallucinations, hallucinations that are controlled by the outside world. In fact, every experience that you have in your entire life, every action you take, in fact, your ability to understand the words that I'm speaking, to hear the sounds and translate them into words that have meaning, is caused by some combination of what's inside your head and what's outside your head in the world. To understand how this works, we're going to take your brain's perspective for a moment. For your whole life, your brain is trapped in a dark, silent box called your skull. Your brain is always receiving information from your senses, information about what's going on in the world from light waves and chemicals and changes in air pressure and so on. This information is what scientists call sense data, and it's ambiguous. It can have many different causes. When your brain doesn't have access to the causes, it only senses the outcomes. So for example, suppose you hear a loud bang. What caused that bang? And what should you do about it? Is it lightning and thunder? Is it a car backfiring? Could it be a gunshot? In every moment, your brain asks itself, figuratively speaking, the last time I encountered this sense data similar to this moment, what did I do next? What did I see next? What did I hear next? And the answer need not be a perfect match to the situation, just something close enough to give your brain an appropriate plan of action that helps you survive and maybe even thrive. And the really interesting thing, if that isn't interesting enough, is that your brain is always receiving sense data from your body too. So as your brain is controlling your body, body budgeting, it's controlling your heart, your lungs, your immune system, your metabolism, and so on. The body is always sending sense data back to the brain. And in the same way, your brain also has to make sense of the signals from your body. For example, an ache in your chest could be anxiety if you're waiting for a test at a doctor's office. It could be hunger if you're waiting for dinner at a restaurant, when we used to go to restaurants. It could be the beginnings of a heart attack. Your brain is using past experiences to guess at the meaning of sense data. And this is what your brain is doing all the time, automatically and effortlessly. It is a basic operating principle of the brain. So how does your brain figure out the causes of sense data when it only has access to the outcomes? It can only sense the outcomes. This is what scientists and philosophers call a reverse inference problem. When I presented you with a blobby image a minute ago, I presented your brain with a reverse inference problem, and your brain solved it twice. Once before you saw the colored image and once after. And what was the difference between those two? A new past experience. Now, the blobby bee image is a useful image to describe, just sort of to unveil to you and show you what your brain is actually doing all the time. Because this is how your brain solves reverse inference problems, by remembering past experiences that are similar to the present in some way. In psychology, a group of things which are similar to one another is called a category. And a mental representation of a category is called a concept. So when your brain is figuratively asking, what is this pattern of sense data similar to? It's actually constructing categories. A category is really not something that you have stored in your head. It's not like a tidbit of knowledge that you just pull up like a file from a file drawer. A conceptual category is something that your brain is actually making, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So here's an example of a category, a group of things which are similar in some way. This is the category of cats. Now, cats are similar to each other in various ways. They have whiskers, they have pointy ears, they purr. This is a list of features that cats share. And for many years, scientists believed that this mental list of features was how you knew what a cat was, that it was the concept for a cat. So when you would see an object or an animal, you would ask, does it have whiskers? Yes. Does it have pointy ears? Check. Does it purr? Yes. Okay, it's a cat. This list of features was thought to be the concept that described the category that was stored in your head so that you could retrieve it whenever you needed it. But here's the thing. There's a lot of variation in this category. Some cats are big, other cats are small. Cats have different eye color, and they have different fur color and different fur thickness, and some of them don't even have fur. So the simple list idea does not work for describing what a concept is for a cat. And in the real world, your brain represents concepts that are not just defined by physical similarities, they're defined by something else. They're defined by the function that the instance is serving in a particular situation. So for example, if I ask you to think of a cat and you're in a pet store, your brain will construct the concept of a cat with features that would make it a good pet. If I ask you to think about a cat in a zoo, your brain might construct a very different concept. Now, after you've seen a mouse in your kitchen and your brain conjures a cat with features that would make it a good mouser, probably not Bill the cat from Bloom County, but maybe a cat that would have the features that are really good at catching mice. And when I ask you to think of someone who's really hip and maybe kind of aloof and sort of an operator, you know, a cool cat, you might conjure a different image. Here, I'm illustrating the dude from the Big Lebowski, the Coen Brothers movie. Notice that the various instances of cats here are all physically different. Their features vary with the function that they serve in a specific situation. So the concept cat changes from situation to situation because the function of cat manifests in different ways as the situation changes. And you can take any concrete category, like a bird, for example, and do exactly the same exercise. If I ask you to think of a bird and you're in a park, you might your brain might conjure the concept robin. If I ask you to think of a bird when you're at a restaurant, you might think chicken, unless it's Thanksgiving time, in which case you might think turkey. And if you're in a pet store, you get the idea. Even things which appear to have physical similarities, you can think of them as conceptual categories, because actually what your brain is doing in any given instance is creating a set of representations of things that are similar in a functional way. And this is also sometimes called abstract, making abstract categories. This is something the human brain does very, very easily. And as far as we know, really no other animal brain can do this as fluently and as broadly as the human brain. Because in a conceptual category, you can have instances that look very, very different from one another physically, but in a specific situation, they all share the same function. So here is, I'm showing you a conceptual category. Everyone who's watching this, who's ever been in an airport, knows this category. This category are things that you can't bring through airport security. The category is not made of instances that share physical features. Instead, they share a physical function. This category exists only inside our heads, and it's in the head of every adult who's ever flown on an airplane. Abstract categories like this are categories of social reality, meaning these instances belong to the same category, not because they share physical features, not because they're similar in how they look or smell or sound, but because we impose a similar function on them by collective agreement. This is how a human brain tailor-makes conceptual categories as needed. And most of the things in civilization, in society, are actually categories like this. Consider, for example, the category money. Little pieces of paper only have value as their function to trade them for material goods, because we all agree to impose that function on those little pieces of paper. And if we withdrew our agreement, they would not have that value anymore. Similarly, The same is true for mortgages and any other type of item that we treat as currency. That's just one example of social reality. So this is how your brain is tailor-making concepts to make sense of sense data. So for example, when I show you this image, this is a reverse inference problem. What do you see? Well, most of you are likely to see a cat because your brain is making a concept so that you could experience these lines as a cat. Probably because I just showed you a bunch of images of cats, and in psychology, we call this priming. But there is no cat here. And what if I told you that this is actually supposed to be an apple with a leaf and a stem? If you take a minute, most of you can probably see the apple with the stem and the leaf. So in each case, your brain is using past experiences to construct a concept to make sense of these lines so that you know what to do next. Either pet this thing or eat it. So your brain is continually constructing concepts to make sense of sense data that comes from your eyes and your ears and all the sense organs of the body, and also from sense data from the continuous stream of sense data from inside your body. And this is how your brain makes experience, including the experiences of emotion. So for example, to make meaning of sense data coming from your body, your brain is constructing emotion concepts. And here the example is happiness. Let's take happiness as a concept. Here are a variety of images depicting what you might see or do when you are feeling happy. Happiness is not one feeling, and it doesn't come with one set of physical sensations. The physical actions here are different. The sensations are different. The feelings are different, and yet they're all happiness because they're serving a similar function. Happiness is a category of highly diverse instances, and your brain is constructing a concept of happiness that fits particular situations. This is how your brain makes meaning from the symphony of sense data coming from your body and connects it to what's going on around you in the world, so that your simple feelings, that you experience these simple feelings of mood or affect as full-blown complex emotions. Now, I understand that what I'm saying here is a little bit counterintuitive. This is really not how we experience our emotional lives. So if what I've already said sounds pretty counterintuitive, what I'm going to say next is going to sound even more counterintuitive. And that is that this whole process that your brain is engaged in making concepts to create experience and regulate your action is actually happening mostly by prediction. Meaning, you don't see a cat or feel happy and then categorize it. Your brain starts with present conditions, the present moment, the sights and sounds and smells and sensations from the body in the present moment, and predicts what's going to happen in the next moment. It's constructing a concept that, in effect, is what you will hear and see and feel and do in the next moment. So your brain is not reacting to things in the world. It's predicting pretty much everything you do and everything you experience. Now, for the last, I don't know, decade at least, there's been a paradigm shift underway in neuroscience called predictive processing. In daily life, it feels to us like we encounter situations and react to them, but the predictive processing hypothesis is that the brain is actually predicting these changes. And when considered, I mean, they're right, I'm showing you, just a small number of papers here from a corpus that's well over 500 papers at this point, that when considered together, really form a coherent, neurobiologically inspired research program that explains how the variety of thoughts and feelings and perceptions and actions that make up your everyday life are really constructed from the same anatomical and neural features, the same general causes. This predictive processing approach, trying to understand how the brain predicts and corrects as continually as a way of guiding your actions and constructing your experience, this approach really unifies the study of the mind and collapses artificial boundaries between thinking and feeling and seeing and acting, between different domains in science. Like, we have these labels like cognitive neuroscience and affective neuroscience and social neuroscience and visual neuroscience. There are all these little silos. Really, though, this approach provides us with a common framework for understanding really how a brain interacts with the body and the mind in the world to create a human mind, and also what goes wrong in mental disorders and physical disorders and neurodegenerative disorders. You can understand them really within one framework. I'm today just going to give you a really cartoonish explanation of how this prediction process works. Basically, your brain is continually talking to itself all the time. It has what's called intrinsic activity. And what your brain is doing when it's talking to itself is it starts with initial conditions in the body and in the world, and it projects itself forward in time, guessing what the body has to do next and what you will feel next. These guesses begin as a population, a collection of past experiences, a concept that your brain is building from past experience. These past experiences, this concept, is a set of hypotheses about what will happen next. So your brain is guessing. It's a plan for action. What should I do next? It's also a plan for experiencing the world. What will I see next? What will I hear next? And so on, all based on the probabilities that are rooted in the statistics of your past experience. So your brain, you can think of your brain as sort of a statistical inference engine whose function is to guess at which actions will be most beneficial in the situation that you're in and infer the most probable sensory changes as the causes. All of this is built from past experience. So you could say, in a sense, that your concepts are guesses about possible futures that you might have. They are candidates to explain the sense data that will arrive to your brain in a moment from now. We unpacked this very slowly when you experience the blobby bee and when you experience the apple cat apple. Your brain took guesses at what the sensory data meant based on past experience. Sense data from the world and from your body then help that are constantly streaming into the brain, help to select which instance of the concept will best fit the situation. And the result is an experience and a plan for action. So this is what psychologists mean when they say that sense data are categorized. It means that the brain has conjured a concept that at its root is a preparation for action and also an inference or a plan for what will be experienced in the next moment. This is actually really well illustrated. There are lots and lots of examples to illustrate how prediction works. For example, if any of you are baseball fans, one way to understand the drama between a pitcher and a batter is that the batter's brain is actually making a set of predictions to swing, so creating a concept to prepare to swing the bat at the ball, not where it is, but where it will be in a moment from now. So the batter's brain is using all kinds of past experience based on the state of his own body, what the weather conditions are like, who this pitcher is, and so on, to predict where the ball will be in a moment from now and actually his brain executes the plan for the swing, not waiting to see where the ball is. In fact, if the batter waited to see where the ball was and then tried to mount a swing, he'd actually miss the ball. So in addition to being a fun sport to watch, actually baseball is a battle of wits, really, between the predicting brain of a batter and the predicting brain of the pitcher. And all of this is happening without their awareness and very effortlessly. Because your brain is basically doing this all the time. You don't experience your mental life this way, but this is how it's happening under the hood. And in fact, right now, as I'm speaking to you, and what your brain is doing is attempting to predict the words that will next come out of my mouth. And imagine how surprised you would be if I had mentioned some other orifice of my body. That surprise is an indication to you that your brain was predicting. Now, each time a guess is chosen, the concept is strengthened, increasing the odds that your guess will be chosen again in the future. So for example, if you cultivate an experience of awe and you do it deliberately and you practice it again and again and again, let's say for 5 minutes every day, your brain will get really good at creating that concept and having that experience, and it can become really automatic. It's kind of like driving. If you practice a skill enough, it becomes automatic and it kind of runs on autopilot. And of course, when the brain receives inputs from the body and the world that don't match the predictions, they can modify those predictions. The brain can take in new information so that it can predict better next time, so that it can construct concepts that are better tailored to the situation so that it can predict better next time. And in psychology, we have a really fancy name for this. We call it learning. That's what learning is. Now, this GIF illustrates some of the other operating principles of concepts. The first thing it illustrates is that your brain is building concepts creatively out of bits and pieces of the past. I'll wager that most of you have never actually seen, probably none of you have actually seen electrical towers playing jump rope before, but you can look at this image and understand that that's what's happening, because your brain is able to combine bits and pieces of past experience to create a completely novel concept. In cognitive psychology, this is called conceptual combination. In neuroscience, we call it generativity. This is how when you can encounter a person or something in a different culture for the first time and make a reasonable guess about what to experience and what to see, because your brain can do conceptual combination and generatively create new concepts on the fly. But this little movie also illustrates another very cool thing about the way that your brain makes concepts. Can you feel right now, well, can you hear the towers as they hit the ground? Can you feel the thud in your chest as the towers hit the ground? If you can, that's because your brain is actually changing the firing of its own neurons to give you an experience, an illusion, and a hallucination, because all you're actually experiencing right now from the world, the only sense data from the world is visual. But if you can hear and feel vibrations and hear the sound of the jumping towers, that's because your brain is actually changing the firing of its own sensory neurons. And this is what brains do when they make a concept. So a concept is not some abstract thing. It's actually the brain changing the firing of its own neurons. And I'll just show you one example of data from one of our studies to demonstrate to you how this works. So right now, what you're looking at are images of brains. On the left, you're looking at the medial portion of a brain. So the brain has two hemispheres. A human brain has two hemispheres. You crack them open like an egg, And what you're looking at is the inside surface of one of those hemispheres, with the front of the brain on the left and the back of the brain on the right. And on the right-hand side, you're looking at a lateral view of the brain. So that would be the outside of one hemisphere. And I've just sliced in a little bit so we can see certain parts of the brain that would otherwise be obstructed. And the blobs here, the colored blobs here, are a depiction of an increase in brain in brain activity that is occurring as human participants have just heard a little narrative and they're asked to simulate that narrative. So they'll hear a little story, which is basically asking them to imagine a set of concepts. And this is the brain activity that you see. Now, what's really interesting about this is, despite the fact that subjects are lying completely still in the scanner with their eyes closed, completely closed, we see a change in activity in motor cortex, premotor cortex, somatosensory cortex. So these are the parts of the cerebral cortex that are really important for processing touch and processing movement. But subjects are lying completely still. Their eyes are closed, but we see an increase in activity in visual cortex, the parts of the cerebral cortex that are very important for vision. This is an increase in activity in a part of the brain called the insula, which is considered to be the primary interoceptive cortex, which means, that's a lot of words. It means the primary sensory region that receives the sense data from the body, from inside the body. So this indicates that the region of the brain that's important for processing changes in your heart rate, your breathing, your metabolism, your immune system, and so on, are showing an increase in activity, even though you're not moving whatsoever. And what's really interesting, the most interesting thing about this is that there's also a change in a whole matrix of nuclei in the subcortical regions of your brain that control your inner systems. So we see all of these changes only after listening to a situation, a scenario that evokes a set of concepts in a human brain. But you don't have to take my word for it. Just think about the last time you were thirsty and you drank a glass of water. Within seconds of draining the last drop, you probably felt less thirsty. But how does this happen? Because actually water takes about 20 minutes to reach your bloodstream and then your brain. So what relieved your thirst 20 minutes before your brain received sense data from your body that you were hydrated? The answer is prediction. As your brain plans and executes the actions that allow you to drink and swallow, it simultaneously anticipates the sensory consequences of gulping water, causing you to feel less thirsty long before the water has any effect on your blood. Because your brain knows from decades of past experience that drinking water leads to quenching your thirst. So your brain doesn't wait. It just predicts your experience and starts to construct it rather than reacting to the events in your body. And then 20 minutes later, that prediction is confirmed. So concepts do more than help you think. They actually are tools for regulating your body and for constructing your experience. And this is the way in which you are an architect of your own experience. You can literally change what is going on inside your body and how you feel by making different concepts. You can do this deliberately. You can train your brain to learn new concepts for the purposes of changing how your brain predicts in the future and how you will experience things in the future. And this is how emotions are made. Physical changes in your body like changes in heart rate, changes in breathing, changes in sweating, and so on, they have no inherent emotional meaning. They actually have no inherent psychological meaning. Your brain makes bodily changes meaningful as an episode of emotion by constructing a concept for emotion that is tailored to the situation that you're in, the conditions of the world that you're in. So your emotions are not your reactions to the world. They are your constructions of the world, or more precisely, they're your brain's categorization, your brain's way of making meaning of what is going on inside your own body in relation to what's happening to you in the world. And your brain creates emotions in this way. It actually creates every experience you ever have this way when it is explaining your internal sensations in terms of what's going on around you in the world. The more concepts your brain can make, the better it can tailor its guesses to specific situations that you're in. We call this phenomenon emotional granularity. So to summarize, your brain is continually constructing concepts predictively to control and make sense of the changes in your body. Your brain's main job is to control the systems of your body. That's the main goal, or the main reason, in the sense that brains evolved. It's one of the main reasons why brains evolved. And everything that you think and you feel and you see is in a sense in the service of regulating your body. We don't experience every feeling of happiness, every insult we bear, every hug we give. We don't experience them this way, but that actually is one way of understanding what's going on under the hood. A fuller discussion of the ideas and science behind the topics we covered today can be found in my first book, How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, and in my more recent book, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And as Hazel mentioned, I just have to show this picture because I think it's so cool. There's my book in Times Square in New York. This is the first, probably, and last time I will ever experience anything like that, so I wanted to share it with you. You can find out more about the work that we do at my public website, which has a lot of information. And I also have an academic website where all my papers are online. So I'll thank you for your attention, and we can move to the question and answer period.
Brilliant. Lisa, thank you so much. Professor Feldman Barrett, thank you so much. That really was an outstanding talk in every way, visually and in terms of the content and in terms of the insights of these very complex concepts that you managed to get across with disarming simplicity, although if we think for a moment, we know that they're not. So thank you so much. Let me look at the questions, and I'd like to, we have a few minutes for questions remaining, and I'd like to invite everyone to type in your question. There is no, I have written this for the College of Science. There is no stupid questions, so please don't hesitate to put what you're wondering about into the chat, and we'll go through some of these. Let me just go through the questions we have. Now we have a question from Diana. Can you repeat the two terms used with the jump roping power lines?
Yes. So isn't that the coolest little movie? I love that little movie. And
Right.
you know, after seeing it 100 times, I still, you know, feel it right in my, well, not really. Everything we feel is up here, but you know what I mean. So the words I used were conceptual combination and generativity. So basically, your brain is constantly remembering the past. Memory, you don't have an experience of remembering, but what your brain is doing is it's assembling past experiences in novel ways. So it's taking bits and pieces of the past and assembling them in novel ways. And this is called conceptual combination. And it's also called generativity. Those are the two words that people refer to this phenomenon in the literature. The idea that your brain, or the description of your brain changing the firing of its own neurons so that you hear something that isn't there, and that you might feel something that isn't there, is sometimes called embodiment. That this is an example of what's called embodied cognition, which means that when your brain is processing an event, it's constructing an event, it's constructing it using all the parts of the systems in your brain that are important for sensing and moving, not just it's not just some abstract kind of propositional representation.
Thank you. There's an interesting question here about thirsty versus satiated brain concept, and when we eat quickly. So I have read that when we eat quickly, we may not feel as full as when we eat slowly. I'm not sure if that's what the question is getting to. I did a little paraphrasing there. What is your take? Is it similar to drinking a glass of water?
Yes, the data suggest very much that it is. So your gut has cells in it that signal up to the brain, up the vagus nerve, up the brain, up to the brain, signaling the metabolism of glucose. So not just the ingestion of glucose, but not just the ingestion of food, but the breaking down of that glucose. And that takes about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes for that information to make it to your brain. So if you eat more slowly, that will give more time for your brain to get the message that you're getting the nutrients that you need. And what's so interesting is that the signal is completely separate, it seems, from your feeling of pleasure at eating. So you know that feeling when you know you've had enough, but you just want another bite, you just want to have like one more taste. Those seem to be very, very separate signals dealt with very separately in the brain. There's actually so much to say that's interesting. I will stop now, but there's just so much that's interesting to say about eating and the kinds of signals that the brain gets.
Brilliant. Yes, there's so much you have interesting to say. There is no way we're going to get through all these questions. I'm going to pull out a couple. There's one very interesting one about whether or not the kinds of concepts you've discussed have got any relevance to thinking about implicit bias and schemas. And I want to do that. And then I want to do one more just to give you a sort of a timing sense there.
So I'll just say the big answer to that question is yes. And I deal with that directly in How Emotions Are Made and in 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And I also wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about police shootings of Black men, which also discusses this phenomenon in terms of predictive processing in the brain. So the answer is yes, but the explanations would take a slightly longer than we have time for at the moment.
Sure, thank you. And then there's a couple of questions on meditation and how meditation, has physical benefits for the body and the mind. And I'm wondering if you can go in that direction for a moment.
Absolutely. So meditation, there are a number of ways in which meditation, and I'm assuming we're talking here about mindfulness meditation. There are many types of meditation, right? So I'm going to address my comments to mindfulness meditation, not loving kindness meditation or other types of meditation, because we just don't have the time to cover everything. With mindfulness meditation, there are two potential ways in which the data suggest it's valuable. One is that your ultimate goal in mindfulness meditation is to become experientially blind to your thoughts and emotions and to just experience the sense data. And, the way you would say it is that what you're trying to do is suspend making concepts, to stop categorizing, to stop making meaning of sensations and just experience the sensations. Now, in reality, the human brain can't do that. But what it can do is it can make very, very, very different kinds of concepts. So for example, if I want to take this glass and I want to paint it, the way that painters paint is they learn to not see the glass, but to see pieces of light. So they're becoming experientially blind to the glass, and instead they see pieces of light, and then they paint the pieces of light on the canvas, and they get a pretty decent representation of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional canvas, unless you're me, and then it doesn't look very much like a glass. But if you're practiced at it, what you're learning to do is to make different concepts really closer to the sense data, and making concepts that don't involve you or your well-being or your as a person. That's one way in which meditation helps. The second way in which meditation helps is that one of the things that drives your predictions, your concepts automatically, is the situation that you're in. So for example, there's really interesting evidence to show that soldiers who were addicted to heroin in Vietnam, who were very addicted in Vietnam, were able to kick the habit much more easily when they came back to the States, because the context changed. And so their predictions completely changed. And this allowed them to really overcome their addiction much more easily. If they'd go back to Vietnam, they'd be in the context in which they became addicted, and the context would be driving their predictions in that direction. So think about what you do when you're mindful. What you're doing is you're sort of, figuratively speaking, changing your context without moving, because you're not moving your body anywhere to a new situation, but what you're doing is you're paying attention to features in the situation that were not in the focus of your attention before. And so really what you're doing is you're changing the situation that you're in by virtue of taking some features and bringing them into focus, and other features and backgrounding them. Like right now, for example, if you're sitting down, the back of your chair or the seat of your chair is pressing up against your legs or pressing up against your back. That sense data is always present. You're not focused on it until I said it, and then you would be. But you weren't focused on it initially. So you're changing the situation, which actually changes the trajectory of your predictions. And this is a way of controlling the contents of your thought without actually having to move a muscle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we could keep going for some hours here, but I am really observant of the time, and I'm actually going to not give you a last question because we're going to go over, but there are some really very thoughtful questions in the chat, and thank you so much, everyone. I'm sure you'll find some of those answers in Professor Feldman Barrett's books and on her website, and certainly invite you to do that. I want to thank you so much, Lisa, for a really stunning talk, and echo the comments from so many people in the chat, thanking you for brilliant perspective and for the insights that you've given us today. I want to give a shout out again to the Department of Psychology and the extraordinary work that is going on there to address how the brain works under conditions that include brain disorders. Someone raised Alzheimer's, and there are so many brain disorders that our Department of Psychology is considering, and I want to give you a shout out. We so appreciate your engagement with the College of Science. We so appreciate your support. We are so pleased to connect with you going forward. Kevin Thompson, who is here, is our Associate Dean of Development in the college, and it's a great pleasure to work with him and with others in university advancement as we consider how all of us working together can push forward studies of the brain to better effect. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you again, Professor Feldman Barrett. Thank you, Professor Becks, for your introduction, and thank you to each of you, and have a wonderful afternoon or day wherever you are. Thank you.